Okay, our next assumption was constant returns to scale. That as a factory gets larger, it does not get more efficient. If we drop this assumption, if we say this is not true, which is not true in the real world, then we have increasing returns to scale. And so as the factory grows, it gets more efficient. That the cost per unit drops. And therefore, you're going to get large factories. If you have large factories, you're going to have cities because the workers that work at the factory are going to want to live near the factory. So once you have trade and once you have increasing returns to scale, you're going to get cities, kind of two types of cities. You're going to get your trading cities and your cities that spring up around factories. Now, they could be in the same place. Okay. And if they are in the same place, you're going to get a larger city because you're going to have the people involved in trade are going to live there, and then also the people that are involved in the factories. Okay. And so as you grow larger, you get more productive. That's increasing returns to scale. And so you think of an assembly line. Like if I'm having to do all the work myself, it's going to take me a long time. With an assembly line, I focus on just doing one bit. I get really good at that. And we can, the classic assembly line, we move the car through and I just do my thing over and over again. As that factory grows large, as it goes from 1 or 2 workers to 100 workers, it got much more efficient. So there are lots of examples of this. And generally factories, especially in the modern era, the larger they are, the more efficient they are, the more they can crank out product at a cheaper per unit cost. And so once you start to get factories, you really don't get this until the Industrial Revolution. You kind of, with the Industrial Revolution, you get your first modern factories. And these are very primitive factories. They're basically just utilizing specialization of labor. There's not much automation going on in these factories. There's like a water wheel that's like spinning, turning maybe one weaving machine. It's a very primitive factory. It's like 7 people. But it does have increasing returns to scale. And once we start this, we start to get mill towns that are springing up around these mills. Okay. All right, now I heard talk about this. And so this is just kind of an example of, again, this is very foreign to us because we essentially don't make anything ourselves. We buy everything that we have. But of course, back in the day, people were self-sufficient. You lived on a farm, you grew your own food, and by and large, you kind of made your own clothes or sewed your own clothes or even made your own shoes, or if you're lucky, you had shoes. It was a terrible time, okay? Don't let anybody tell you the past was great or idyllic. It was terrible. People were dying at young ages. Half your kids would die of some sort of terrible disease. You worked all the time, or you were basically dirt poor, what we would consider now dirt poor. You're literally living in dirt. Usually these, if you go back and like look at the old log cabins or old like frontier areas in the US, the ground's literal dirt. If you go to villages in the present, my wife's family's from a village. You go back to that village, it's like dirt floors or raised floors with actually, space apart, like wooden, like raised wooden planks above a floor. And the planks are wide like that because that's how you go to the bathroom. You go to the bathroom in between the wood. I don't know how I got on this tangent, but my point is, it's not the idyllic romantic lifestyle that it's often portrayed to be. It was terrible. Anyways, my point was, you made your own shoes, all right? People used to make their own shoes. And so you could think, here's the cost of making your own shoes. I don't know why this says milk. This got cut off from the previous slide. But anyways, you make your own shoes, okay? Say it cost $1. The factory to make the shoes cost 30 cents. And so anywhere near the factory, you are going to buy the factory shoes versus making your own ones. Now, it costs money to ship the shoes. And so as we get further, this is distance from the factory, as we get further away from the factory, the shoes are going to cost more and more and more. And so eventually you'll rely on home production out here as you get further away from the factory. But anywhere we're close enough that the raw price of the shoes plus the shipping costs, you're going to buy the shoes. Now, as the factories grow, as society and economies develop, we lower that cost of producing the shoes in the factories. We also lower transportation costs. Okay. And so we get the growth of the cities. And so you can see as this price drops, as the those transportation costs go down. That this kind of triangle gets wider in terms of the area that can be serviced by the factory. And eventually we arrive to the present where basically all the goods we buy are built in factories. That's because the factories are super efficient. They have low per unit costs, and transportation now is very cheap. It's cheap to ship something virtually anywhere because of modern technology. And what is the result of this? More and more factory towns. Everything's built in factories. Those factories have towns associated with them. All right. And so just right now, just like as far as we made it in the lectures, you can see the forces driving urbanization. As we get more industrialized, as more of our goods are made in factories, in cities, we get more cities, and we get more people living in cities, which is what we've seen over the past 200 years. The past 200 years have really been the rise of the city as we've grown so much economically in the past 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, which is the transformative event in human history, which is when we go from a zero-sum economy, zero-sum agrarian economy, to the growing pie technological based economy, which is really based on human capital, human knowledge and skills. So as we've made that transition post-industrial revolution, we've gotten more and more efficient in our factories. Our trade networks have become increasingly dense and increasingly cheaper to ship stuff. And so this has given rise to urbanization, which is why we go back to the last lecture, we see more and more people living in cities. Also, as we get more and more trade, we get more and more people engaged in that trade, which is also driving cities. So these two forces, specialization, comparative advantage, in concert with increasing returns of scale, has really been driving a lot of that urbanization, and which is why we see a lot of that urbanization being focused in areas that are producing. So you think about China. China's been urbanizing rapidly. That's focused on those manufacturing sectors. In the U.S., that's really been focused on trading sectors, which is why the growing cities in the U.S. are on the coasts. Those are really the connected cities. All right. In terms of increasing returns of scale, we can use Detroit as a nice case study. Here's the big Ford plant. You know, Henry Ford is famous for kind of popularizing or making the assembly line super efficient in producing cars. And so here you can see it in action, where the car gets dragged along. Each worker has a skill that they specialize in, producing these cars at incredibly low cost for their time. And this really happened in Detroit. This is a quirk of history, and you'll read about it in the book Triumph of the City. But really, this is a quirk of history that all the entrepreneurs who were working in cars were near Detroit. And so there's lots of spillovers between those entrepreneurs. And so Detroit became the natural home of the auto industry. It's kind of like these things can be really quirks of history. You know, you think about Seattle. Seattle became this big tech hub. Why? Bill Gates happened to be born there. And so, these things can really hinge on, random chance of history and why cities may grow. So this is the story of Detroit. And so we get the assembly line method of production, which is 8 times more efficient than what came before. And then it really becomes the center of auto manufacturing. And so you can see as it becomes the center, workers are attracted to Detroit. Detroit grows, reaches a peak around the mid-century, corresponding with the dominance of the American automobile manufacturing industry. And then that industry has been on a decline basically since since the 50s, but really since the 70s is when it really went into decline. Of course, we have the rise. Actually, that's not true. We have the rise of a new automobile manufacturer in the U.S., Tesla. But Tesla is, of course, not located in Detroit. I guess it was located in California, but then Mr. Musk got mad and moved it to Texas. I don't know where it's located now, but it's not in Detroit. Okay, we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna do some hardcore math. All right, get your get ready for some math and modeling.